Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a certified yoga teacher at the advanced 500-hour level. I am an ordained minister. I'm a kirtan artist, musician, amongst other things. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about fighting yourself and believing in yourself. Before I get into the talk though, as always, I want to thank my patrons over on Patreon. They are the community that make these talks possible. Without them, I simply would not have the time and the resources to create these very humble videos for you. So if you want to thank them or check out being a part of that community, you can follow the links below and help support creating this work. All right, so fighting yourself. This is an interesting concept and it's rather nuanced, so I don't want to gloss over it or try and oversimplify it. But there's a section in A Course in Miracles where it's talking about doing a certain practice, and it's talking about doing it every day. And then it basically says if you find that your willpower is weak and you're not able to do it, it says, I think, and I quote, if I remember correctly, don't fight yourself. It says you are not ready. And so that really resonates with me, because I think a lot of what a lot of people try and do in spirituality is they sort of use spirituality to beat themselves up. And in fact, I might say that there might be teachers out there that also sort of encourage this because of their own outlook. They might think that students need to beat themselves up. In order to be spiritual, you need to sort of like pound your ego into submission. All right? If that's what you believe and that's what you want to believe, then that's perfectly fine. If that has yielded you results, great. But what I see is that's basically the ego's approach to everything. The ego believes in force. The ego believes that you aren't spiritual. You aren't spirit. So in order for you to be spirit, you need to like work your butt off. You need to fight yourself because you aren't this thing. But if you think from the enlightened perspective, the non-dual perspective, you are not separate from the divine. There's not two things happening, one spiritual and one not spiritual. So why in the world would you need to beat yourself into submission? It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So this is one aspect of it. And again, I need to be careful about not oversimplifying it, because some of you out there may take this the wrong way and then think, oh, well, I don't have to do anything. The question is, in my experience, the ego can both advocate for beating yourself up, because again, that sort of strengthens its position. You're not divine. You are not spirit. You are a sinner. You need to correct. You need to fix. There's something fundamentally wrong with you, okay? So you need to just really work your butt off to fix that. That is a very egoic perspective. That is a perspective that strengthens the ego. And again, I have worked personally with spiritual teachers that advocate that kind of point of view. Personally, I cannot agree with that. Again, if you think that's how it is, then that's awesome. More power to you. But that's not been my experience. That's not what I've seen working. It may produce some results, but I don't think that can take us the distance, because we are spirit. We are enlightened. We are an extension of divinity, of love. So, how in the world could we have to work so hard for it. Now, here's where it gets tricky. If I am identified strongly with the ego, then I very well may need to make some changes in order to realign my perspective with truth. And that might feel like a lot of work. It might feel like it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of effort, okay? So again, it's so subtle and so tricky, because some people might hear me saying the first part again and say, well, I don't need to do anything. And then other people, when they hear me talking about these changes that need to be made, again, they might think, oh, okay, so this is going to take years, and I need to do all these very difficult esoteric practices in order to become enlightened and realize my true nature, whatever it might be. So it's really so tricky and so subtle, because the ego, again, it can use the perspective of you're a sinner and you need to work really hard to fix things. I'm using sinner in a very broad sense, but again, there's something fundamentally wrong with you, or you're not enlightened, you're not divine. It can also use this idea of, oh, I'm already perfect, so I don't need to do anything. I'm enlightened, so that means that I'm right about everything, and I'm never wrong, and I'm perfect just as I am, and no one can tell me anything, kind of thing. And it just strengthens the ego again. So the point I think I'm trying to make here is that whether we're using effort or force, or we're surrendering, it really is a question of which one is going to strengthen the ego, okay? Because usually in a moment, it's going to be one or the other. Sometimes the ego, again, wants us to sort of quit. It wants us to just say, well, I'm fighting myself, so I'm just going to go do what I usually do. I'm just going to overeat. I'm going to watch porn. I'm going to not do my spiritual practices. I'm going to not make any change. Fundamentally, yoga is about change, positive change, whether that we think of yoga as wanting to be healthier, whether we think of it as wanting to be spiritually enlightened or grow spiritually, it's going to require change, okay? Now again, the change can come through effort, it can come through surrender, but what I want to point out is what the Course is saying about fighting yourself. It's so subtle, because again, in Buddhism and in yoga, we have a term that is used, right effort. And I really like this term, because it's not saying no effort, which is what I think, it can be easy to fall into that and be like, oh, okay, I don't need to do anything, I'm perfect. I've met people before who they read some Zen literature and they thought, oh, well, it sounds like everything is Zen, so I'm not going to do anything. Well, you're just stuck in your same old point of view. That didn't do anything for you. And at the same time, there's a truth to it. You know, there's a truth to we don't need to do anything because we're already perfect. If we could realize that, if we could see that, but that's the key, seeing it. And for some people, when the time is right, those words can be truly transformative. Just stop trying. Stop thinking that there's something missing. But at a different stage, some people who maybe think, oh yeah, I don't need to do anything, it's all right here, they actually need to be encouraged to work a little harder, to develop some discipline and effort. And again, the real question is what is going to diminish the role of the ego? What is going to strengthen the role of the ego? Now, as I've said in talks past, the ego really doesn't really even exist. I don't want to get into that in this talk. If you're curious about that, you can go watch other talks that I've given on that subject. But even though the ego doesn't really exist, in a sense, it exists until we see that it doesn't exist. So it still can be useful to talk about. Like with Newtonian physics, quantum physics basically disproved the rules of Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics doesn't hold up. It only is true within a certain sphere or a certain when certain conditions are set up. But as you get outside of those conditions, Newtonian physics falls apart. And quantum physics explains both Newtonian physics and a much broader truth. And this is true of saying something like the ego doesn't exist. Okay? In reality, the broader reality of enlightenment, it doesn't exist. But for many people who are trapped in the grasp of believing in the ego, it does exist. And so they functionally need to act as though, as if. And so again, thinking of the ego as a concept here can be very useful because, again, the question, do I make an effort or not, is really based on which choice. Is the ego wanting you to make the effort? Is the ego telling you you're not good enough, that you're a sinner, that you need to fix yourself, so you need to do more practices? Well, then maybe you shouldn't be doing that. Or are you feeling drawn to those practices? Like there's an energy, is love or passion or inspiration drawing you to practices? So I have a dear friend who really loves chanting a certain mantra, and they are just drawn to this, and it's love. Okay, love. They're not saying, oh, well, I'm so terrible, I need to atone for my sins, so I'm going to chant this mantra. It's like, no, there is something drawing me toward this practice. So it could be a practice, it could be a teacher, it could be a community. And it's not saying that everything's always going to be easy, but there is an energy of the spirit behind that. Okay, and then, you know, maybe some days you're like, well, you know, not really feeling it. Well, that could be just laziness, right? So maybe we have to overcome that laziness there. But I really, again, appreciate the Course in Miracles saying, don't fight yourself, because I think that that's correct. And I like the Buddhist tradition, which says, right effort. Not just any effort, not just effort, right effort, okay? And again, I don't think this is a simple thing. I think this is very nuanced. So these are almost like questions that we can continue to contemplate and ask ourselves on our path. Is this right effort? Am I making the right effort? What would that look like? Is my effort strengthening or diminishing the role of the ego? And again, the ego is the voice, the belief in separation of you from the divine. And I understand that for some of you, that feels extremely real. I get it. I've been there for sure. Like the divine couldn't be further from where I am, because what I'm feeling is just wretched, awful. I do not feel love, do not feel peace, do not feel joy. Okay, I just feel terrible. So I get it. That could be what you're experiencing. But again, when I pick up a practice, when I pick up doing something, really it should lighten that. It should begin to shift that relationship. And I do want to say this, that I believe that the same practice can flip. So a practice that at one stage is liberating us from the jaws of the ego, you might say. It is dissolving those unreal barriers between self and other, between sacred and profane. You might find at another stage that trying to keep doing that same practice, trying to again kind of say, well, this worked in the past, so I'm gonna force myself to do this thing because I'm not feeling connected or I'm not feeling whatever. So I'm gonna force myself. This may not be the best approach. And again, you might find that that same practice that at one time was diminishing the influence of the ego in your perspective is now actually increasing it. And the word I'll use that I think is most appropriate is grasping. So many of us, we get on this path, we learn some practices, and we get a glimpse, a preview, a peek in the tent of the enlightened state, of an awakened state, and it's so good. And then it goes away. This is very common, and it's almost to be expected. So I have other talks about that, and I'll be happy to talk about it again at some point, but this is more common than not. So if you're experiencing this, this is absolutely par for the course. So I know you may not read about that in Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie, but Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie are a little bit like winning the spiritual lottery. You know, if everyone who wanted to be rich just was waiting around for the lottery, to win the lottery, like no one would be rich, right? It's so few people that win the lottery. So spiritually speaking, we can't wait around hoping to win the spiritual lottery, and we can't expect our experience to be that of a lottery winner. Okay, these are amazing teachers. I'm not trying to diminish their role at all, but when they share their stories, to some degree, their story can be as discouraging as it is inspiring, because their experience is so unusual, so abnormal. Most people will compare. Again, the ego is all about separation, comparison, all of this stuff. So, oh, Byron Katie had this experience. I didn't have that experience. I must not be enlightened. Eckhart Tolle had this experience. That's not what happened to me. I must not be enlightened. Okay? So, again, very easy to fall into this sort of trap and this sort of belief. So, most people, the vast majority of people who have a real spiritual awakening, honest to goodness, they go through what's called sometimes oscillation, which is, oh, I've got it. Oh, I lost it. Oh, I've got it. Oh, I've lost it. This sort of back and forth of feeling like you're getting it, you know, enlightenment's right there. You're feeling the joy, you're feeling the peace, you're feeling the love, you're feeling the connection. And then it seems like the next minute you wake up the next morning or even later in the same day, and it seems like, well, where did that go? Why did it disappear? And this can go very quickly. It can also go very slowly, like very slow oscillations of feeling for months at a time very connected, and then months at a time very disconnected, or even years. Okay, it could be in almost any orientation in terms of time. Some people have like a whole section of their life where they might feel connected, and then they get married, have kids or something, and then they might feel like they completely lost that connection, okay? And so this could be like a whole like decade or decades of their life, something like that. So this, again, the question we want to sort of look at, and when I'm talking about oscillation, that might be helpful because it might depend on what side of the oscillation we're on, whether or not we're doing something that is strengthening the ego or diminishing the ego. So again, grasping is sort of like it sounds, except it's maybe you could say more about the heart and the mind, that it's like a fear of, oh, I don't feel it, so now I need to grasp. This is what I did before to feel connected, and so I'm just going to do those same things. Sometimes that will be effective, okay? Again, if some of this has to do with, I don't know, what we could call lifestyle, things of that nature, that if we are really kind of abusing the body, treating it very poorly, it may be hard to feel that vibrancy and aliveness very easily. We might be sleeping very poorly. We might be, again, making poor dietary choices or other choices. And this can really pull us down, just on a regular physical level. I'm not even necessarily talking spiritually. Most spiritual traditions will give some advice about often diet and taking care of the body, and they'll say something along the lines of the body is the temple of the soul, okay, or something along those lines. The body is sacred, so you need to treat it well if you want spirit, in a sense, to inhabit the body. This isn't really quite accurate from like a non-dual perspective, but again, I'm not tied to just one way of looking at things. I like to be flexible in terms of how I think or look at things because I find that more useful. In reality, my experience, awareness isn't in the body. The body is really within awareness. So talking about it as though spirit is inside of the body is not really accurate from my perspective, but I think it is helpful in this instance. So things like that. If I feel like I'm in some really negative patterns and I feel like they are pulling me down, then it can be very helpful to break out of those patterns. Here's where the Course's advice comes in, though. I think it might be helpful to break those patterns, and yet I don't think it's good to beat yourself up, to judge yourself, to again, fight yourself is, I believe, the words that the Course uses. Don't fight yourself. And I really think this is important. So can we make a change and move in a positive direction without fighting ourselves? And I think the answer is yes, but it's really going to be, again, in that moment, kind of looking at things. Because I think, from my experience and perspective, fighting yourself will only strengthen the ego. Because from a very deep spiritual perspective, there's no self. There's no self to fight. And so not only have we created a self to fight, we also have created, again, duality. One part of us is fighting another part of us. We are in a seeming separation. So letting go of that, being very kind and compassionate. But the other side of it, from my perspective, is believing in yourself. I gave a talk a few weeks ago. I don't know if I got my point across very well, but what I wanted to get across was the ego doesn't know what you are. And your ego generally, unless you've really gone deep into this work, is what you think you are. You think you're a human. You think you're a man. You think that you're a yogi. You think you're this many years old. You have a very limited conception of yourself as a human being. But when we get to a certain point, all of that stuff, I mean, conventionally, yes, I get it. But from a much broader perspective, none of those things really mean anything. And our personal identity dissolves. And there is the I am. There is pure awareness there, which knows no bounds. It knows no limitations. It could be aware of anything. And so again, this idea that I need to fight myself to be spiritual, to get what I want, I need to sort of wrestle myself. You know, honestly, it may be an unavoidable stage, but even if it is, I'm hoping this talk can maybe help someone get out of that stage as quickly as possible. I have my doubts that it is unavoidable. Because again, the Course is sort of saying, hey, don't fight yourself. And yet the Course is also full of practices and other advice, things to do, things that might not be particularly easy on first blush. So again, having the discipline, being willing to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this stuff. So once again, from my perspective, nothing is required. You're already spirit. You are already connected with divine love. You're already an expression of that. What do you need to do to be that? Nothing. You don't, right? It's a little bit like me saying, well, what do I need to do to get on YouTube? Well, here I am, but I'm asking, no, but what do I need to do? It's like, yes, you've done it. You're there. You don't need to do anything. You just need to realize that you've already done it. And so again, this sort of talk can be extremely confusing because some people, they don't realize. And it is that realization, the lack of realization, that is what we can call ego, what we could call, you know, being asleep instead of being spiritually awake. It really is that recognition on a very deep level that is really very transformative. And again, in my experience, it's not necessarily like a light switch. It can feel very sort of back and forth, very confusing, very gray for many people and can be for a very long time. But today I just wanted to really speak about this one concept because I see in people who study with me that some of them could benefit from more discipline or rigor in their approach, that they would benefit by making spirituality, spiritual practice, spiritual community more of a priority. That a lot of the things they're struggling with in their life that they perhaps see as not related with spirituality actually is very much at its root a spiritual issue. And then there can be others who think that they need some other practice or they need to do more or something along these lines. And really, that isn't the case. That they could just relax and not fight themselves. They don't necessarily need to do more. They can relax and allow and just be what they already are, be in that recognition. Now, from an ultimate perspective, I think this is true for anybody. That's why there are stories of people who have spontaneous enlightenment experiences. They have no training, they don't have a teacher, they may not even be interested in spirituality or God or divinity or anything like that. They just, no interest. And yet they're walking along the street and something happens and they have this download. They have this realization of ultimate truth for whatever reason. And this shows us that this is inherent within us, that it is there waiting to be realized. And all we need to do is be very pragmatic. Because again, for me, a lot of the old ways, I am not so sure that those are the best ways. As far as new ways, we don't really know. We are trying to figure that out. And so it becomes very pragmatic. What works and what doesn't work. And in a very real sense, again, the question I want to be asking myself is, do I feel that connection? And if I don't, then I may need to explore, or I may need to pick back up or deepen certain practices. And I say explore because, again, you might think this made me feel connected before, so I just need to do more of it. That could be true, but that also might not be true. It might be that you need to explore another aspect, another practice, something that maybe takes you deeper or takes you in a different direction. But for some, it will be just, oh, I felt so connected when I was meditating every day and I stopped. Well, what if I did that again? Well, then it might return that feeling of connection, that feeling of belonging. And I think that's really it, is putting us back in touch with that part of ourselves. Now, ultimately, I'll say that I don't think you need to do anything. But again, as I said earlier, we need to be pragmatic about that. You don't need to do anything to feel connected when you feel connected, and you don't need to do anything. Until that day comes, then you need to do something to feel connected. When is that day? I don't know. Is that, how long do I need to practice? I don't know. What kind of practice do I need to do? I don't know. Like I said, it's a little bit like you practice the guitar until you feel like you can play the guitar. And you can play the guitar. You can pick it up and you can play it. And you can make music on it. All right? How long does that take? How much do you need to practice? What scale? I don't know. It just depends, right? It's pragmatic. So again, from my perspective and what I'm trying to share with you, there is this feeling. And I want to separate it from necessarily a good feeling or a bad feeling, or again, the sort of ups and downs of life, because in my experience, we can have ups and downs and still feel this connection. So I want to be careful about that, because often I think myself and others, we might describe it as peace, joy, love. And you could say that there are two forms of these things. There's sort of the relative coming and going version. So, if I set everything up just right, then I might experience some peace. If I win the lottery or fall in love, then I might experience joy. If I witness the birth of my first child, I might feel a lot of love. So again, we have these words and we use them in our common experience, but there is, you might say, a transcendent version of these things, a version that is not touched by the ups and downs. And so again, we want to be really pragmatic about this. How much do I need to practice? What do I need to do to feel that? I don't know. And again, I will say that in an ultimate sense, you don't need to do anything. You just need to be it. Just need to be that, experience that, allow that. That's really how it feels to me. It really feels more of an allowing than something that you need to chase. However, as I said earlier, this is the luxury, I think, of being more outside of the ego's sphere of influence than inside of it. When we are inside of it, it absolutely feels like that connection is something we must chase. So again, I do understand that. I don't want to confuse anybody who's like, no, but if I don't practice, I feel it, I'm awful, this and that. Yes, okay, I get it. So for where you are right now, then that is something that you need to do. But having said that, again, I don't think you need to fight yourself. And I think it is counterproductive, ultimately, to fight yourself. And this is me saying this as someone who's fought themselves a lot in the past. I have made things much more difficult and scary than I think I needed to. And so again, a lot of these talks, if not most or even all of them, are me trying to share my experience with these things in the hopes of saving you time and effort and heartache on your journey and your path. So they are always meant in the spirit of being helpful and trying to help you. So anyway, everybody, I want to thank you for listening today. Please reach out if you feel that I could give you a hand with anything. Also, my friend Alexis and I have created a shop, and we have some goods there that have various sayings that I use from time to time, and we've tried to make them into some fun merch. So hats and t-shirts and sweatshirts, hoodies, mugs, stickers, all kinds of things. So this is a new and different way that you can help support the channel by purchasing from our store. So I will try and leave the links below. It might take me a minute to remember to do that, but please check out the Mahapatha Yoga shop. And again, that's a way that you can get something hopefully fun, and you can help support the work that we're doing here. All right, everyone. Again, thanks again. I look forward to hearing from you. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share if you're on YouTube. Special thanks to my patrons on Patreon. And until next time, namaste, and have a beautiful, beautiful day.